February 14th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. Deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska's Denali region, 20 miles from the nearest civilization, the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit.
I woke up, tied to a massive spruce tree, the frozen ropes cutting into my parka so tightly that I couldn't draw a full breath. My hands were numb, my face burning from the bitter cold. Poachers had beaten me and left me here to die, revenge for years of fighting their illegal trapping operations in these protected lands. The wind howled through the pines, carrying snow that stung like needles against any exposed skin. But that wasn't the worst of it. A massive white wolf stood 15 feet away, its ice-blue eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that froze the blood in my veins. The creature was enormous, easily 140 pounds of pure muscle beneath its thick winter coat. Its breath came out in visible clouds in the frigid air. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any growl. This was apex predator territory, and I was helpless prey. If you love incredible true stories of survival and the unbreakable bonds between humans and nature, hit that subscribe button for Arctic wolf legends. Drop a comment telling us what time and where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. The wolf's huge head lowered, its body tensed. I closed my eyes tightly, certain these would be my final moments. Everything would end like this, frozen to a tree in Alaska's wild nature, torn apart by one of nature's most efficient killers. I thought of my family, the guards at the station, wondering why I hadn't returned from patrol. The crunch of heavy paws on the snow grew closer. Then I felt it. Not the ripping of fangs, but a sharp impact against the tree trunk next to my left shoulder. My eyes snapped open in shock. The white wolf had reared up on its hind legs and slammed its powerful paw against the ropes, not against me. Another strike came, precise and controlled, hitting the binding around the trunk with incredible force. Ice crystals exploded from the impact point. An impossible thought crashed through my frozen mind. This animal was trying to free me. The wolf dropped to all fours and moved closer, its massive head now inches from my face. I could see every detail. The thick winter coat that gleamed pure white in the failing afternoon light, the intelligent eyes that seemed to study me with purpose. It sniffed me carefully, a low rumble emanating from deep in its chest. Then it opened its jaws wide, displaying teeth that could crush bone, and gently clamped them around the thick rope. The wolf pulled with tremendous strength, its neck muscles bulging with effort. The rope groaned and stretched, but held firm. The poachers had used climbing rope, the kind designed to support human weight on cliff faces, and the sub-zero temperatures had made everything harder than steel. The moisture from the previous night's snowfall had seeped into the fibers and frozen solid. A frustrated growl rumbled from the wolf's throat. It released the rope and slammed its paw against the tree with such force that bark shattered and fell like frozen shrapnel. Then it began working the ropes with its claws, movements surprisingly careful and precise. Each swipe was calculated, as if the animal understood that one wrong move of those razor-sharp claws could slice through my winter gear and into flesh. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. Along the wolf's left side, partially hidden by the thick winter coat, ran a long, jagged scar. The fur had grown back white over the healed wound, but the pattern was unmistakable. A deep gash that must have been life-threatening when first inflicted. My heart nearly stopped as recognition hit me like a physical blow. 4 years ago, during an early spring thaw, I had been on routine patrol in this same region when I heard desperate whimpering coming from a small clearing. What I found would haunt me for weeks afterward. A mother wolf lay dead, her pure white coat stained dark with blood, victim to an illegal trap that had crushed her spine. Huddled against her cooling body was a wolf pup, no more than 8 weeks old, also caught in a smaller trap. The metal teeth had torn a vicious gash along the pup's side, and the tiny creature was shivering violently, going into shock. I had violated every protocol that day. White wolves, Arctic wolves that had migrated this far south were incredibly rare in this region. Removing the pup from the wild, even to save its life, could have cost me my job. But I couldn't leave it there to die. I carried that pup 12 miles back to my ranger station, its blood soaking through my jacket the entire way. For 3 weeks I nursed it back to health in secret. I cleaned and stitched that terrible wound, fed it with bottles every 4 hours, kept it warm by the fire. The pup was smart, too smart for comfort sometimes. It learned to recognize my footsteps, would howl softly when I entered the room. The scar healed slowly, the wound knitting together until only a raised line remained under the growing fur. When the cub was strong enough, I released it back into the forest and watched it disappear into the woods without looking back. I never expected to see it again. It was part of my wildlife rescue work, but that cub was special. I often wondered if it had survived, if it had found a pack, if it remembered those weeks spent in the warm cabin. "Ghost," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper through frozen lips. That's what I had called him during those 3 weeks. Ghost, for his pure white coat and the way he seemed to appear and disappear like a phantom. "Is it really you?" The wolf's ear twitched, a small movement, but unmistakable. He stopped worrying at the ropes and looked directly into my eyes. In that moment, I saw recognition. Not just animal acknowledgement, but something deeper: memory, understanding, connection. The wolf stepped closer and gently pressed his cold nose against my cheek, a gesture so familiar it brought tears that immediately froze on my face. I would have said more, but that's when the first howl shattered the silence. It was distant, maybe a quarter mile away, but crystal clear in the frozen air. The sound was different from a wolf's howl, higher pitched, more aggressive, with an almost manic quality. Ghost's entire body went rigid, his ears swiveled, pinpointing the direction. Another howl answered the first, then a third, creating an eerie chorus that made my blood run even colder than the temperature. Wolverines. Of all the creatures in the Alaskan wilderness, wolverines were among the most dangerous, not because of their size, but because of their absolutely fearless, savage nature. These weren't the cartoon characters from movies. Real wolverines were 30 to 40 pounds of pure aggression, with jaws powerful enough to crack frozen bones, and a reputation for taking down prey much larger than themselves. And they hunted in family groups. Ghost didn't hesitate. He attacked the ropes with renewed fury, his teeth tearing at the fibers, his claws ripping through the bindings. I could hear the desperation in his movements. He knew what was coming, knew we had minutes at most. One rope began to fray, the individual strands snapping one by one with sharp, pinging sounds. The wolf pulled with all his considerable strength, growling with effort. Snap! The rope around my upper chest gave way. I gasped as pressure released, able to breathe fully for the first time since waking. But I was far from free. My arms were still bound tightly to the trunk, and my legs were wrapped in another layer of rope below. Dark shapes began appearing between the snow-laden trees. The first wolverine emerged from behind a drift of snow, a stocky creature with dark brown fur and a lighter stripe along its sides, its small eyes glinting with predatory intelligence. It moved with a peculiar loping gait, powerful and confident. A second appeared to the left, then a third to the right. 4 of them total, I realized with growing horror. A breeding pair and 2 older juveniles, probably from last year's litter. They were coordinating, spreading out to surround us. Wolverines were smart, frighteningly so. They knew how to work together, how to distract and attack from multiple angles. The wolverine turned toward them and positioned its body between me and the approaching hunters. He let out a warning growl, a sound so deep and powerful that even the frozen ground seemed to tremble. It was saying, "Don't come any closer." But wolverines don't back down. They know no fear. They are known to chase bears away from their prey and attack animals 10 times their size. The largest wolverine, the dominant male, distinguished by his massive shoulders and scarred muzzle, let out a chattering snarl. It was a horrifying sound, almost like laughter mixed with rage. The group began to advance, moving in unison like a well-trained military unit. 20 feet, 15 feet. Ghost faced an impossible choice. If he continued trying to free me, he'd leave, himself vulnerable to attack from behind. If he focused on the wolverines, I'd remain trapped and helpless. His head swung between me and the advancing predators, clearly torn. Then, he made his decision. Ghost turned to face the wolverines fully and rose up to his full height, placing his front paws on a snow-covered boulder to gain elevation. He threw back his head and released a howl that shook snow from the surrounding trees, a sound of pure defiance and protective fury. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. I will protect him to the last breath. The lead wolverine responded with another of those terrible, chattering snarls and gave the signal. The attack began. 2 wolverines feinted left, while 2 went right, immediately splitting Ghost's attention. The wolf was fast, incredibly fast, but he couldn't watch all directions at once. He lunged toward the pair on the right, snapping his jaws with a force that could shatter a moose's leg bone. The wolverines danced back, too quick, using their lower center of gravity to change direction instantly. While Ghost was focused on them, the other 2 began creeping toward me, bellies low to the snow. Their eyes were locked on me with unmistakable hunger. I struggled against the ropes with all my remaining strength, feeling them give slightly, but not nearly enough. The wolverines were 10 feet away now, 8 feet. Ghost spotted them and charged with such explosive speed that the wolverines scattered, but only temporarily. This was their strategy: divide and conquer, wear down the larger predator through constant harassment. It was brutally effective. The lead male saw his opening and rushed in from Ghost's blind side. The wolf sensed the danger and spun, but not quite fast enough. The wolverine's jaws clamped down on Ghost's hind leg, just above the joint. I saw the wolf's face contort in pain, heard his howl of agony cut through the frozen air. But Ghost didn't collapse. On the contrary, the pain seemed to ignite something primal within him. With a roar more like a bear's than a wolf's, he twisted his body with astonishing flexibility and turned his head. His jaws found the wolverine's neck, and he shook his massive head violently. The wolverine released its grip and flew several meters through the air, crashing into the snowdrift with a heavy thud. "Ghost!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Behind you!" He didn't understand my words, but the urgency in my tone made him whip around. Another wolverine had been sneaking up from his rear. The wolf's paw lashed out in a blur of white, catching the predator mid-leap. The impact sent the wolverine tumbling sideways. It recovered quickly, but there was new wariness in its movements. I was watching helplessly as my savior fought for both our lives, bleeding from the leg wound, surrounded by 4 relentless predators. The wolverines had drawn blood, and the scent of it in the frigid air seemed to drive them into greater frenzy. Ghost went on the offensive, making a calculated charge toward the largest male. His massive paws left deep prints in the snow as he built momentum. The wolverine tried to dodge, but Ghost had anticipated the movement. His shoulder slammed into the predator like a battering ram, sending it rolling. Before the wolverine could recover, Ghost's jaws snapped closed just inches from its head, a deliberate near miss that served as a warning. The message was clear: the next bite wouldn't miss. But the reprieve was momentary. The other 3 wolverines rushed in together, attacking from 3 different angles simultaneously. Ghost spun and dodged, his movements becoming more desperate. He caught one wolverine with a swipe that sent it yelping, but another managed to sink teeth into his shoulder. The wolf roared and shook it off, but the damage was done. Blood now stained his white coat in 2 places. I pulled frantically at the ropes, feeling them loosen infinitesimally. The cold had made my fingers nearly useless, but adrenaline drove me to keep trying. If I could just get one hand free, the battle raged on. Ghost was holding his ground through sheer determination and size advantage, but the wolverines' pack tactics were taking their toll. Each exchange left new scratches, new bite marks. The snow around us was trampled and stained. The wolf's breathing was becoming labored, visible in great cloudy bursts. Then Ghost did something unexpected. Instead of defending or countering, he suddenly charged straight at the largest wolverine with everything he had. The lead male, caught off guard by this berserker assault, tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. Ghost's full 140-pound weight slammed into it, and his jaws clamped around the wolverine's thick neck. For a terrifying moment, I thought he would kill it. His jaws had the power. One crushing bite, and it would be over. But Ghost didn't bite down. Instead, he held the wolverine pinned, growling a warning so primal, so absolutely final, that even I felt it in my bones. The other wolverines froze, clearly reading the situation. Their leader was at the mercy of an opponent who could end its life in a heartbeat, but was choosing not to. Slowly, deliberately, Ghost released his grip and took 2 steps back. He was panting heavily, blood dripping from his wounds, but he stood tall and imposing. The message couldn't have been clearer. Leave now, or the next time I won't show mercy. The lead wolverine struggled to its feet, shook itself, and assessed the situation with those cold, calculating eyes. One of its packmates was limping. Ghost was still standing strong despite his wounds, and his positioning made it clear he would die before abandoning his ward. The math didn't add up in the wolverine's favor anymore. The lead male made a decision. It let out a sharp bark, different from its earlier aggressive sounds. The other wolverines immediately began backing away, moving in reverse without turning their backs on Ghost, maintaining eye contact. It was a tactical retreat, not a surrender, and they all knew it. These predators would remember this encounter, but for now, the cost of continuing was too high. They melted back into the forest, disappearing between the snow-covered trees as silently as they'd appeared. But I could still sense them nearby, watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. Ghost stood absolutely still for a long moment, every sense alert, listening to the wilderness. His ears swiveled, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. Finally, satisfied that the immediate threat had passed, he turned back to me. The wolf was a mess. Blood matted his pristine white coat in several places. His breathing was heavy, and I could see the pain in the way he held his right hind leg. But those ice-blue eyes still burned with determination. He hadn't come all this way, hadn't fought that hard, to give up now. He approached slowly, sniffed me again, as if reassuring himself I was still alive. Then his gaze fell on the remaining ropes. A low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound of pure determination this time, not aggression. Ghost clamped his jaws around the main rope again and pulled. I added what strength I could, twisting my arms, working them against the bindings. I felt something give. Another pull from Ghost, another twist from me. The rope was stretching, the frozen fibers beginning to separate. With a dull snap, one loop broke free. My left arm suddenly had a few inches of movement. Ghost immediately targeted the next section, his teeth working at the knot with surprising precision. How did he understand this so clearly? Was it memory from being trapped himself as a pup? Or was this something deeper, true problem-solving intelligence? Another section gave way. My left arm pulled free completely. I immediately reached across and began working on the ropes holding my right arm, my numb fingers struggling with the frozen knots. Ghost continued pulling, our efforts now coordinated. Together, we were making real progress. 5 minutes of intense struggle later, the rope around my right arm finally loosened enough for me to pull free. I collapsed forward, catching myself with my hands in the deep snow. My legs were still bound, but the worst was over. Ghost watched as I worked the final ropes off my lower body, ready to help if needed, but understanding I could manage this part myself. When the last rope fell away, I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me. I'd been tied for hours, the cold had sapped my strength, and frostbite was setting into my extremities. I collapsed again, this time landing on my side in the snow. Ghost hemen yanıma geldi. Bana yaslanarak vücut ısısını paylaştı. Titreyen elimle onun yanına uzandım ve kalın kürkünün altındaki yara izini hissettim. "Sen beni kurtardın evlat," diye fısıldadım. Sesim titriyordu. Tıpkı benim seni kurtardığım gibi. Kurt kısa bir süre gözlerini kapattı ve dokunuşuma yaslanarak az önce tanık olduğum vahşi savaşla tamamen tezat oluşturan nazik bir hareket yaptı. Ama henüz güvende değildik. Wolverine'lerin geri dönebileceğini biliyordum ve yürümek için uygun durumda değildim. Sırt çantam kaçak avcıların attığı yerde yaklaşık 20 metre uzakta duruyordu. Ghost'un desteğiyle yarı emekleyerek, yarı sürünerek çantama ulaşmayı başardım. Parmaklarım o kadar uyuşmuştu ki fermuarı zar zor hissedebiliyordum. Ama sırt çantamı açmayı başardım. İçinde acil durum tıbbi çantam vardı. Bu devreye çıkmadan 3 gün önce yenilediğim standart orman bekçisi ekipmanı. Tanrı'ya şükür kaçak avcılar onu iyice aramaya zahmet etmemişlerdi. Tersizimi, GPS cihazımı ve tabancamı almışlardı. Ama ilk yardım malzemelerini bırakmışlardı. Ghost lay down beside me in the snow. His breathing heavy but steady. The blood from his wounds had begun to slow, but in these temperatures, any open wound was serious. Infection could set in rapidly, and blood loss in the cold was even more dangerous than in warm weather. The body burned so many calories just trying to stay warm. "Easy, boy," I murmured, pulling out the antiseptic and gauze. "I know it's going to hurt, but I need to clean these wounds." The wolf watched me with those intelligent, ice-blue eyes. He didn't pull away as I moved closer, didn't growl or show any sign of aggression. It was as if he understood, not just that I was trying to help, but that I was the same person who had saved him 4 years ago. The recognition between us was mutual and absolute. I started with the wound on his hind leg, where the lead wolverine had bitten him. The punctures were deep, though not as bad as they could have been. Ghost's thick winter coat had provided some protection. I poured antiseptic over the wounds, and the wolf's entire body tensed. A low whine escaped his throat, but he held still. His muscles quivered beneath my hands, but he didn't pull away. "I know, Ghost. I know it burns, but remember when you were a pup? You let me do this then, too." I worked as quickly as my frozen fingers would allow, cleaning each wound thoroughly. The antiseptic would prevent infection, at least for now. Then I wrapped gauze around his leg, tying it tight enough to hold, but not so tight that it would cut off circulation. Ghost watched every movement, occasionally glancing toward the forest where the wolverines had disappeared. The shoulder wound was trickier. It was in a spot where any bandage would likely slip off as he moved. I cleaned it as best I could, then applied a layer of antiseptic ointment that would stick to the fur and provide some protection. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best I could do in the field. "There," I said softly, running my hand along his neck in a gesture that came back to me from those weeks 4 years ago. "You're going to be okay, boy. You're one tough wolf." Ghost leaned his head against my chest, and I felt the rumble of something between a growl and a purr, a sound of contentment and trust that made my throat tighten with emotion. This magnificent creature had risked everything to save me. The debt I thought I'd paid 4 years ago had been returned 100-fold in the last hour. But we still had a serious problem. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, and with it, the temperature would plummet even further. I was already borderline hypothermic. My gear was torn in several places from the ropes, and we were miles from any shelter. My radio was gone, my GPS smashed. The poachers had made sure I couldn't call for help. I pulled out my emergency blanket, one of those thin metallic sheets that reflected body heat, and wrapped it around my shoulders. Then I checked my pack for food. There wasn't much. 2 protein bars, a handful of jerky, and a thermos of coffee that had somehow stayed marginally warm. I unscrewed the thermos and took a careful sip. The lukewarm liquid burned like fire going down my throat, but it sent a small wave of warmth through my core. Ghost was watching me with interest, his nose twitching at the smell of the jerky. Despite everything he'd been through, he was still a wolf, and wolves were always hungry, especially in winter, when calories were the difference between life and death. I pulled out the jerky and offered him a piece. He took it gently from my hand, his teeth never once touching my skin, despite how easily they could have. He chewed thoughtfully, then looked at me as if to say, "More?" I couldn't help but smile, my first smile in what felt like days. "Yeah, okay, you earned it." I gave him the rest of the jerky piece by piece. It wasn't enough to sustain a wolf his size for long, but it was something. I ate one of the protein bars myself, forcing down the cold, chalky substance. Every calorie mattered now. As I ate, I assessed our situation. The ranger station was approximately 12 miles southeast. In good conditions, I could hike that in 4 or 5 hours. But these weren't good conditions. I was injured, exhausted, and suffering from exposure. Night was falling, bringing temperatures that would drop to -30 or worse. And the wolverines were still out there, watching. Ghost suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. He stared intently into the darkening forest, a low growl building in his chest. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing except shadows lengthening between their trees. But Ghost's senses were far superior to mine. If he sensed danger, it was there. "They're still watching us, aren't they?" I whispered. The wolf's growl intensified slightly. Yes, they were still out there. Wolverines were persistent hunters. They would follow us, waiting for weakness, for an opportunity. And as night fell and the temperature dropped, that opportunity would come. I needed to think. Moving in the dark through deep snow while being stalked by wolverines was suicide. But staying here without proper shelter wasn't much better. I looked around the immediate area, my ranger training kicking in despite my exhausted state. About 30 meters ahead on our left, I spotted something that might be a solution. A massive pine tree had fallen over, its roots torn from the ground, creating a natural hollow. Snow had piled up on the tree, forming a small, cave-like depression. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shelter us from the wind and provide a defensible position. "Come on, son," I said to Ghost as I tried to stand up. My legs were shaking. I felt like I was going to fall, but I forced them to stay upright. "We need to find better shelter before it gets completely dark." Ghost immediately stood up and leaned against me to support me. I leaned heavily on him, probably too heavy for an injured animal, but he bore my weight without complaint. Together, we moved slowly and laboriously through the snow toward the fallen tree. Every step was agony. My feet felt like blocks of ice. My hands were barely responsive. But Ghost was there, steady and strong, guiding me forward. We covered the 30 yards in what felt like 30 miles, but we made it. The hollow beneath the root system was better than I'd hoped. It was deep enough to shelter us from the wind and large enough for both of us. The snow that had drifted against the fallen trunk would actually help insulate us. Snow was a surprisingly good insulator when used properly. I crawled inside, and Ghost followed, curling his body around mine. His thick winter coat and natural body heat immediately began to warm the small space. I wrapped my emergency blanket around both of us, creating a reflective barrier that would hold in what warmth we generated. As darkness fell completely over the Alaskan wilderness, I felt Ghost shift against me, positioning himself so that he faced the opening of our shelter. He was placing himself between me and any threat that might come. Even now, wounded and exhausted, he was protecting me. "You know," I said softly, my words slightly slurred from cold and exhaustion. "I named you Ghost because you were white and quiet. But I think there's another reason too. You're like a ghost from the past, come back when I needed you most." The wolf's ear flicked back toward me, listening. I ran my hand along his side, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of his breathing. "I thought about you a lot over the years," I continued. Speaking helped keep me conscious, kept my mind from drifting into the dangerous fog of hypothermia. Wondered if you survived, wondered if you found a pack, or if you stayed solitary. Arctic wolves aren't supposed to be this far south. Your mother must have been part of a group that migrated down during a particularly harsh winter up north. Ghost shifted slightly, his tail curling more tightly around me. When I let you go, I told myself it was the right thing to do. Let you be wild, be free. But part of me always wondered if I should have kept you longer, made sure you were really ready. I paused, my voice catching. But look at you now. You're magnificent, strong, smart. You survived, Ghost. You more than survived, you thrived. A sound echoed through the forest, that terrible chattering call of a wolverine. Ghost's body tensed immediately, and a warning growl rumbled from his chest. But the call came from some distance away, and it wasn't getting closer. The wolverines were still out there, but they were keeping their distance. For now. The temperature continued to drop. I could feel it even in our small shelter. My body shivered uncontrollably. A good sign, actually. When you stopped shivering, that's when hypothermia became critical. Ghost pressed closer, sharing every bit of warmth he could. You know what's funny? I said, my words coming slower now. When I became a ranger, people told me never to form emotional attachments to the animals. You're here to protect them, not befriend them, they said. Keep your distance, stay professional. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I broke that rule with you, big time. And you know what? I'd do it again, every single time. Ghost turned his head and gently licked my face, a gesture so full of affection and recognition that tears froze on my cheeks before they could fall. We lay there in the darkness, two survivors huddled together against the brutal Alaskan winter. The wind howled outside our shelter, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the wolverines calling to each other. But inside our small haven, there was warmth and safety, and an unbreakable bond forged twice. Once in a cabin 4 years ago, and again in this frozen wilderness. My mind began to drift, despite my efforts to stay alert. Hypothermia was insidious like that. It made you drowsy, made you want to sleep, and sleep in these conditions meant death. But Ghost seemed to sense this. Every time my breathing began to slow too much, he would shift or nudge me, keeping me conscious. Stay awake, I muttered to myself. Have to stay awake. Ghost whined softly, as if agreeing. I forced myself to focus on the plan. Come first light, we would need to move. 12 miles to the ranger station. In snow, wounded, with wolverines following. The odds weren't good, but they were better than staying here. At the station, there were other rangers, medical supplies, communication equipment. We just had to make it through the night first. Time lost, meaning in the darkness. Minutes and hours blurred together. Ghost never slept. I could tell from his breathing patterns, from the way his body remained tensed and alert. He was standing watch, protecting us both through the long, frozen night. At some point I must have dozed despite my best efforts, because I jerked awake to find the first grey light of dawn beginning to seep into our shelter. Ghost was still pressed against me, but his head was up, watching the forest intently. I tried to move and nearly cried out from the pain. Every muscle in my body had stiffened during the night. My hands and feet were numb beyond feeling. But I was alive. We were both alive. "Morning, boy," I croaked, my voice barely recognizable. Ghost turned to look at me, and I saw exhaustion in his eyes. He'd stayed awake all night, guarding us. The bandage on his leg was still in place, though stained with dried blood. The wounds I couldn't bandage had crusted over with frozen blood and antiseptic. "We need to move," I said, forcing myself into a sitting position. The world spun sickeningly and I had to wait for it to steady. "We can't stay here another night." I crawled out of the shelter, Ghost following close behind. The morning air was brutally cold, the sun just beginning to paint the eastern sky with pale colors. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering our tracks from yesterday, but also making travel more difficult. I pulled out my compass, thank God the poachers hadn't taken that, and oriented myself. Southeast, 12 miles. I could do this. We could do this. Ghost stood beside me, his ice-blue eyes scanning the forest. Then he did something that surprised me. He moved a few steps in the direction we needed to go, then looked back at me and huffed, a clear signal. He was offering to lead. "Okay, boy," I said, taking my first stumbling steps through the fresh snow. Lead the way. We began our journey through the frozen wilderness. Ghost moved slowly, accommodating my pace, frequently looking back to make sure I was still following. Every step was a battle against pain and exhaustion, but I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, again and again. The sun climbed higher, but provided little warmth. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation burning my lungs. Ghost stayed close, sometimes pressing against my side when I stumbled, providing support. We'd covered maybe a mile when Ghost
suddenly froze, his ears flat against his head.
A warning growl rumbled from his chest. I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. The wolverines had found us again. There were 5 of them now, the original 4 plus a new one, probably called in as reinforcement. They emerged from the trees in a loose semicircle, cutting off our path forward. The lead male was in the center, and I could see the determination in its eyes. They'd followed us all night, waiting for this moment. Ghost moved to place himself between me and the threat, but I could see he was limping worse than yesterday. The wounds, the cold, the sleepless night, it had all taken its toll. He was running on empty, and the wolverines knew it. This time, I realized with cold certainty, we might not survive. The lead wolverine let out that terrible chattering call, and the others responded in kind. The sound echoed through the forest, sending birds exploding from nearby trees. They began to advance, moving in.
Coordination, cutting off any escape route.
Ghost's growl intensified, his lips pulling back to reveal his fangs. He was preparing for another fight, a fight he might not win this time. But he wasn't backing down. He would fight to his last breath to protect me. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a fallen branch, about 4 feet long and reasonably solid. It wasn't much against 5 wolverines, but it was something. I moved to stand beside Ghost, raising the branch. "Together," I said to him. "We fight together." The wolf glanced at me, and I swear I saw understanding in those eyes. Then he turned back to face the wolverines, and we stood side by side, prey turned predators, ready to make our last stand in the Alaskan wilderness. The wolverines began their attack run, and Ghost lunged forward to meet them. Ghost hit the first wolverine with the full force of his weight, bowling it over before it could dodge. But the other 4
immediately swarmed from different angles.
I swung my branch at the nearest one, connecting with its shoulder. The wolverine stumbled but recovered instantly, its eyes now locked on me with increased fury. I swung again, this time missing, as the creature ducked under my attack with surprising agility. Its jaws snapped inches from my leg. Ghost spun and lunged, driving it back, but that left him exposed to the others. A wolverine latched onto his already injured hind leg, and Ghost's howl of pain cut through me like a knife. I brought the branch down hard on the wolverine's back, forcing it to release its grip. The creature turned on me with a snarl, and I barely got the branch up in time to block as it leaped. The impact knocked me backward into the snow. The wolverine was on top of me instantly, its teeth snapping at my face, held back only by the branch I'd wedged between us. Then Ghost was there, grabbing the wolverine by the scruff and literally throwing it several feet away. He stood over me, blood dripping from multiple wounds now, his breathing labored, but his stance was unmistakable. "You'll have to go through me." The wolverines regrouped, circling us at a distance of about 15 feet. They were chattering among themselves, actual communication, coordinating their next attack. The lead male kept glancing between Ghost and me, calculating. These predators were smart enough to recognize that even wounded and exhausted, the white wolf was extremely dangerous. I struggled back to my feet, clutching my makeshift weapon. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. This was where a sound shattered the tense standoff. Not a wolverine's chatter, not Ghost's growl, but something else entirely. A howl, long, melodic, and unmistakably wolfish. It came from somewhere to our east, maybe a quarter mile away. Ghost's head snapped toward the sound, his ears fully erect. He threw back his head and answered with a howl of his own,
Call that seemed to carry across the entire valley.
The sound was primal, powerful, and filled with meaning I couldn't interpret but could feel in my bones. The wolverines had frozen, their small eyes darting between us and the direction of that distant howl. The lead male's ears were back, a clear sign of concern. Wolverines were fearless, yes, but they weren't stupid. They understood pack dynamics. Another howl answered, this one closer. Then another, from a different direction. And another. Ghost wasn't alone. Through the trees I caught glimpses of movement, grey and white shapes moving with purpose through the snow. Within moments, 4 more wolves emerged from the forest, forming a loose line between us and the wolverines. They were smaller than Ghost, their coats a mixture of grey and white, rather than his pure Arctic colouring, but they moved with the coordinated precision of a pack. Ghost had found a pack, or perhaps the pack had found him. The largest of the newcomers,
Big grey male with darker markings around his face, moved to stand beside Ghost.
The 2 wolves exchanged a brief glance, and some silent communication passed between them. The grey wolf's posture suggested he was the pack alpha, but there was no challenge in his stance toward Ghost. If anything, there was respect. The wolverines were backing away now, their bravado evaporating in the face of 5 wolves. The odds had shifted dramatically, and they knew it. The lead wolverine gave one final aggressive chatter, saving face, maintaining dignity, but it was already retreating. The family group melted back into the forest, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. The crisis had passed. Ghost watched until he was certain the wolverines were truly gone, then turned to his packmates. The grey alpha approached cautiously, sniffing Ghost carefully, paying particular attention to his wounds. The other wolves, 2 females and a younger male, waited at a respectful distance,
Postures submissive but curious.
I stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. I was watching something incredible. Wolf social dynamics in action, acceptance of a pack member despite his association with a human. The grey alpha seemed to be assessing Ghost, checking his condition. Then the alpha did something that made my throat tighten. He gently licked one of Ghost's wounds, a gesture of care and acceptance. Ghost turned toward me, and I saw conflict in his eyes. His pack was here, calling him back to the wild where he belonged. But I was still in danger, still miles from safety, still hypothermic and injured. "Go," I said softly, my voice cracking. "Go with them, Ghost. You've done enough. You've saved me twice now. I'll make it somehow." It was a lie, and we both knew it. I probably wouldn't make it another mile on my own. But I couldn't ask him to abandon his pack, couldn't ask him to choose between the wild and the human who'd raised him for 3 weeks 4 years ago. Ghost
Looked at his pack, then back at me.
The grey alpha huffed, a questioning sound. One of the females whined softly. They were ready to leave, ready to take Ghost with them to wherever wolves went to rest and recover. But Ghost didn't move. Instead, he walked toward me and leaned his body against my legs, just as he did when he was a cub, seeking attention and comfort. He looked at me with his ice-blue eyes, and the message was clear. I won't abandon you. The grey alpha made a sound that was part growl, part snarl, almost like disappointment. But then the big male did something that surprised me. He slowly circled around me, sniffing carefully. He was sizing me up, trying to understand what Ghost saw in this weak, almost frozen human. I remained completely still, allowing the alpha to complete his examination. When he turned to face me, he stared into my eyes for a long time. This was a test. Wolves usually avoided direct eye contact unless challenged or provoked. But this was
Different. It felt like a judgment.
Whatever the alpha saw in me must have been enough, because he gave a sharp bark and turned southeast, the exact direction I needed to go. He looked back at Ghost, then at me, and the meaning was unmistakable. We'll help. The pack was going to escort us to safety. Ghost's tail gave a small wag, the first time I'd seen him display such an overtly happy gesture since finding me tied to that tree. One of the females approached me cautiously, sniffing my hand. When I slowly reached out to touch her head, she allowed it for a moment before dancing away, almost playfully. "Thank you," I whispered, though I knew they couldn't understand the words. "Thank you all." The grey alpha started moving southeast, and the pack fell into formation around us. Ghost stayed close to my left side, supporting me when I stumbled. One of the females ranged ahead, scouting. The younger male brought up the rear, watching for threats. The other female moved on my right flank. They'd essentially created a protective diamond formation with me and Ghost at the center. We began moving through the snow again, but this time with purpose and protection. The wolves knew these woods far better than I did, leading us along paths where the snow was shallower, where the terrain was easier. They moved at a pace I could actually maintain, slow and steady.
An hour passed, then 2.
The sun climbed higher, and though it provided little warmth, the psychological boost of daylight helped. The wolves took turns scouting ahead and falling back, maintaining constant awareness of our surroundings. Once, the forward scout, the female who'd sniffed my hand, froze and gave a low warning bark. The entire pack stopped immediately. She'd spotted something through the trees. Ghost moved in front of me protectively, and the alpha joined him. For several tense minutes, we waited in absolute silence. Then I saw what had alerted her. A moose, massive and dangerous in its own right, was moving through the woods about 100 yards away. Moose were unpredictable and had been known to charge both humans and wolves when they felt threatened. We waited until the moose had moved well past our position before continuing. It was a smart call. A confrontation with a 1,000-pound moose could have been disastrous for all of us. As we traveled, I found myself
Studying the pack dynamics.
The grey alpha was clearly in charge, making decisions about direction and pace, but he consulted with Ghost frequently, particularly when it came to me. Ghost had become my advocate within the pack, explaining through body language and sounds why this human was worth protecting. The younger male was curious about me, often approaching to sniff and investigate before bouncing away when I looked at him directly. He reminded me of Ghost as a pup, that same curious energy, that same intelligence in the eyes. Around midday, we came to a small frozen stream. The alpha called a halt, and the pack settled down to rest. Ghost lowered himself carefully next to me, his injured leg held at an awkward angle. I checked his bandage. It was holding, but the wound was seeping again. The constant walking was taking its toll. I had 1 protein bar left. I ate half and tried to give Ghost the other half, but he wouldn't take it. He nudged it back toward me with his nose.
Clear message that I needed the calories more than he did. Stubborn, I muttered, but ate the rest. He was right. I was burning through energy at an alarming rate, just trying to stay warm. The grey alpha had moved to a high point overlooking our position and sat watch while the rest of us rested. I noticed the pack maintained this routine instinctively, someone always on watch, the others resting in shifts. It was beautiful to observe, this ancient pattern of survival that had kept wolves thriving for millions of years. One of the females, the one who'd been less cautious around me, approached with something in her mouth. She dropped it at Ghost's feet, a frozen rabbit, probably from a cache they'd hidden nearby. Ghost sniffed it, but didn't eat. Instead, he pushed it toward the female, as if saying, "You need this more than I do." The pack's social bonds were incredible to witness. They cared for each other, shared resources, communicated with subtle gestures I was only beginning to understand. And somehow, I'd been temporarily accepted into this family, not as a member, but as a protected guest, thanks to Ghost's advocacy. After about 20 minutes, the alpha stood and shook the snow from his coat, the signal to move again. The pack rose as one, and we continued our journey. The afternoon wore on, and I began to recognize landmarks. We were getting closer, maybe 4 or 5 miles from the ranger station now, but those miles felt like they stretched into infinity. My legs were shaking with every step, my vision blurring at the edges. Only Ghost's solid presence beside me kept me moving forward. Then, the younger male, who'd been ranging ahead, came racing back with urgent barks. The pack immediately went on high alert. Ghost's hackles rose,
and a growl built in his chest. Something was ahead, something dangerous. The alpha moved forward to investigate, taking one of the females with him. They disappeared into the trees for several minutes, while the rest
of us waited in tense silence.
When they returned, the alpha's body language spoke of anger and caution. Ghost moved forward and touched noses with the alpha, exchanging information. When Ghost turned back to me, there was something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not fear, but recognition and rage. We moved forward more cautiously now, the pack in tight formation around me. As we crested a small rise, I saw what had alarmed them. Below, in a small clearing, was a camp. Not a legitimate hunting camp, but something thrown together quickly. 2 small tents, a struggling fire, equipment scattered around. And standing near the fire were 3 men. I recognized them immediately, even from this distance. The poachers. They must have been checking their illegal trap lines in this region, completely unaware that I'd escaped or that I was approaching their camp. One of them was the man who'd beaten me before tying me to that tree. The leader, whose face I'd memorized down to
Every scar and feature.
rage surged through me, momentarily overpowering my exhaustion. These men had left me to die. They brutalized me, stolen my equipment, and would have had my death on their conscience, if they had consciences at all. But I was in no condition to confront them. I was barely standing, hypothermic, unarmed except for my tree branch. The smart move was to give the camp a wide berth, reach the ranger station, and come back with backup to arrest them. Ghost, however, had different ideas. The white wolf moved forward, his body low to the ground, stalking. The other wolves immediately understood. This was Ghost's hunt, Ghost's target. The pack spread out, moving to flank the camp from multiple directions. They were going to attack. "Ghost, no," I hissed, trying to grab his scruff, but he slipped from my weak grasp. "We need to go around. We need—" But it was too late. Ghost had already committed. What happened next unfolded with the terrifying efficiency of a wolf.
Pack's coordinated assault.
Ghost burst from the tree line with a roar that made the poachers spin around in shock. The other wolves appeared simultaneously from 3 other directions, surrounding the camp in seconds. The men scrambled for weapons. One grabbed a rifle, another a knife, the third a camp hatchet. But the wolves didn't attack directly. Instead, they circled, darting in and out, forcing the men to bunch together back to back, completely on the defensive. Ghost focused on the leader, the man who'd beaten me. The white wolf's lips were pulled back in a snarl of pure fury, and I realized something. Ghost wasn't just protecting me anymore. This had become personal. He'd recognized the scent, recognized the man who'd hurt the human who'd once saved his life. The man with the rifle tried to aim at Ghost, but the younger male wolf darted in from the side, snapping at his legs. The rifle swung toward the new threat, and Ghost used the distraction to lunge forward, hitting the
Man's arm with his shoulder.
The rifle went flying, landing in the snow 10 feet away. "Get the guns!" one of the men shouted. "Get the goddamn guns!" But every time one of them tried to break away to reach a weapon, a wolf was there, blocking them, forcing them back. The pack wasn't trying to kill them, not yet. They were containing them, controlling them, demonstrating a level of tactical thinking that was both beautiful and terrifying. I stood at the edge of the clearing, transfixed. Part of me wanted to call Ghost back, to end this before it escalated into bloodshed. But another part, a darker, more primal part, wanted to watch these men face the consequences of their actions. The leader pulled a handgun from his jacket, a weapon the wolves hadn't seen yet. He aimed directly at Ghost, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" I screamed, stumbling forward. The shot rang out across the valley, echoing between the mountains. Birds exploded from trees. The pack scattered momentarily from the sound. But the bullet didn't hit Ghost. At the last possible second, the grey alpha had slammed into the man from behind, throwing off his aim. The bullet went wide, burying itself in a tree trunk with a spray of bark. The alpha's intervention had saved Ghost's life, but it had also escalated the situation. The wolves, understanding that firearms made this fight lethal, changed their tactics. They began attacking in earnest. The grey alpha went for the man with the gun, driving him to the ground. Ghost lunged at the leader, his jaws finding the man's thick coat and pulling him down. The other wolves harried the third man, not allowing him to help his companions. It was chaos. The men were screaming, the wolves snarling. I saw blood, both human and animal, staining the snow. One of the female wolves yelped as the man with the knife managed a slash across her flank. But she didn't retreat. If anything, it made her more aggressive. I had to stop this before.
Someone, human or wolf, was killed.
"Ghost!" I shouted with every ounce of strength I had left. "Ghost, stop!" The white wolf's head came up, his jaws still locked on the leader's arm. Our eyes met across the chaos of the fight, and I saw him at a crossroads. The instinct to protect, to avenge, warred with the memory of the human who'd shown him kindness, who'd raised him, who was calling him back now. "Please," I said, my voice breaking, "please stop. This isn't who you are." For a long, terrible moment, I thought he wouldn't listen. Then, slowly, Ghost released his grip on the man's arm and backed away. He gave a series of sharp barks, a command, and the other wolves immediately disengaged, moving to form a defensive circle around me instead.
The 3 poachers lay in the snow, bleeding from multiple bites but alive. Their weapons were scattered, their camp in disarray. They looked up at the wolf pack with absolute terror in their eyes, realizing how close they'd come to being torn apart. "Don't move," I told them, my voice cold and hard. "Don't even breathe wrong, or I won't call them off again." The leader started to say something, but Ghost took a single step forward and snarled, and the man's mouth snapped shut. Using the last reserves of my strength, I moved to where the rifle had fallen and picked it up. The weight of it in my hands was reassuring. Now we had the upper hand. "You're all under arrest for poaching, assault of a federal officer, attempted murder, and probably about 20 other charges I'll think of later," I said. My voice shook, but the rifle didn't. "My friends here are going to make sure you don't go anywhere while we wait." "Wait for what?" the leader spat, trying to sound defiant but failing. I smiled, a cold, grim expression. "For the cavalry. The ranger station is less than 4 miles from here. When I didn't check in yesterday, they would have sent out search parties. They'll find us, it's just a matter of time." As if on cue, I heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The poachers' faces went pale. The sound grew louder, and within minutes, a Forest Service helicopter appeared over the tree line, flying low in a search pattern. I pulled out my emergency whistle, one of the few things the poachers hadn't taken, and blew 3 sharp blasts. The universal distress signal. The helicopter banked toward us, having spotted the camp and the unusual gathering below. As it circled to find a place to land, I felt my legs finally give out. I collapsed into the snow, the rifle slipping from my hands. Ghost was there immediately, pressing against me, lending me his warmth and strength one more time. The other wolves had backed away at the sound and sight of the helicopter, their wariness of human machines overriding their protective instincts. But not Ghost. He stayed right beside me, as he had from the moment he'd found me tied to that tree. The helicopter landed in the clearing, its rotors whipping up clouds of snow. 2 rangers emerged, weapons drawn, taking in the bizarre scene. 3 bloodied poachers sitting in the snow, 1 ranger barely conscious, and a pack of wolves standing guard. "Officer Jenkins," one of the rangers, Sarah Chen, who I'd trained with years ago, shouted over the rotor noise. She ran toward me, her weapon trained on the wolves. "Are you... What the hell is going on here?" "Don't shoot them," I managed to croak. "The wolves. They saved me. They're... protected." Sarah's eyes went wide as she took in my condition, the frostbite, the hypothermia, the bruises from the beating. Then she looked at Ghost, at the bandage on his leg, at the blood on his white coat, and understanding dawned. "Get medical," she called back to the helicopter. "And call for backup. We've got 3 in custody and 1 ranger in critical condition." The poachers were restrained quickly by Sarah's partner, while she wrapped me in thermal blankets and started checking my vitals.
The wolves had retreated to the tree line, watching but not approaching the humans and their machines. All except Ghost. He stayed pressed against my side, refusing to move even when Sarah tried to gently push him away. She looked at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "This wolf," she started. "His name is Ghost," I said softly, "and I owe him my life. They all saved me." More helicopters were arriving now. Backup, medical evac, probably some wildlife officers too, given the unusual circumstances. The clearing was filling with people, with noise, with organized chaos. Ghost's pack called to him from the forest, the grey alpha's howl unmistakable. It was time for them to go, to retreat to the deep woods before too many humans arrived. Ghost looked toward his pack, then back at me. The conflict in his eyes was heartbreaking. "Go," I told him, reaching up to touch his face one last time. "Go with your family, Ghost. You've done enough. You've done everything." He whined softly, reluctant. "I'll be okay now," I promised. "They'll take care of me. But you need to go back to the wild where you belong. Live, Ghost. Live the life you were meant to have." The pack called again, more urgently this time. Ghost licked my face gently, then slowly backed away. He looked at me one final time, those ice-blue eyes holding mine for a long moment, then turned and loped toward the tree line. I watched him go, tears freezing on my face. At the edge of the forest, he stopped and looked back once more. Then, with a final howl that echoed across the valley, Ghost disappeared into the trees with his pack, a white phantom melting into the wilderness. Sarah was talking to me, asking me questions, but I couldn't focus on her words. My eyes were locked on the spot where Ghost had vanished, hoping for one more glimpse of white fur between the trees. But he was gone. The paramedics arrived, loading me onto a stretcher. As they carried me toward the helicopter, I took one last look at the forest. And there, just barely visible in the deep shadows between the trees, I saw them. 5 pairs of eyes watching from the darkness. The pack, making sure I made it safely to the helicopter. Making sure their temporary pack member was truly safe before they returned to their territory. Then they too vanished, and I was lifted into the helicopter. As we rose into the sky, I looked down at the vast expanse of the Alaskan wilderness, beautiful, brutal, and full of more mystery and wonder than I'd ever fully understood. Somewhere down there, Ghost was running free with his pack, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that our paths would cross again someday. Some bonds, I'd learned, transcend the barrier between wild and tame. Some debts can never be fully repaid, only honored. And some friendships, no matter how unlikely, are simply meant to be. The helicopter ride to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital was a blur of pain, exhaustion, and the constant warm pressure of heated blankets. The paramedics worked on me efficiently, IV fluids for dehydration, warming protocols for hypothermia, initial treatment for frostbite. Sarah rode with me, holding a recorder to document my statement while the memories were still fresh. I told her everything, about the poachers ambushing me on patrol, the beating, being tied to the tree, about Ghost appearing like a miracle, fighting the wolverines, staying with me through that frozen night, about the pack that had escorted us to safety. My voice was hoarse, my words sometimes slurred, but I got it all out. "This Ghost," Sarah said carefully. "You're saying it's the same wolf you rehabilitated 4 years ago? The one that got you written up for protocol violations?" I nodded weakly. "Same scar, same eyes. He remembered me, Sarah. I don't know how to explain it, but he remembered." She didn't look skeptical, just thoughtful. "The wildlife officers are going to want to verify this. The pack behavior you're describing, it's extraordinary. Wolves escorting a human to safety, coordinating an attack on armed men. This is going to make national news, maybe international." I hadn't thought about that. I'd been too focused on survival, on the immediate reality of what had happened. But she was right. This story was unprecedented. The poachers? I asked. In custody, all three singing like canaries, trying to cut deals. They've admitted to running illegal trap lines across 4 protected areas. Your testimony will put them away for years. She paused. They're also claiming the wolves were vicious and unprovoked in their attack. Any comment on that? Despite my exhaustion, I managed a bitter laugh. They're lucky the wolves didn't finish what they started. Those men.
Left me to die, Sarah. Ghost and his pack only did what was necessary to protect me. The hospital was chaos when we arrived. Doctors, nurses, wildlife officials, even a representative from the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. Everyone wanted information about the poachers, about the wolves, about what had happened in those woods. But first, they had to keep me alive. The next 72 hours existed in a haze of medical procedures. They treated my severe frostbite. I would lose parts of 3 toes and the tip of my left pinky finger, but the doctors managed to save the rest. The hypothermia had pushed my core temperature dangerously low, requiring careful, monitored rewarming. I had 2 cracked ribs from the beating, extensive bruising, and mild dehydration. You're incredibly lucky, Dr. Morrison told me on the 3rd day, when I was finally coherent enough for a real conversation. Another 6 hours in those conditions, and we'd be having a very different discussion, whatever. Kept you warm that first night. Saved your life. Not whatever, I corrected softly. Who? His name is Ghost. The wildlife officers came next. Dr. Helena Reeves, a wolf specialist from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, spent hours questioning me about every detail. She was particularly interested in Ghost's behavior, in the pack dynamics, in the coordinated rescue. In 30 years of studying wolves, she said, shaking her head in wonder, I've never heard of anything quite like this. Yes, there are documented cases of wolves showing gratitude or forming bonds with humans who help them, but this level of tactical coordination, this commitment to protecting a human, it's extraordinary. Will they be okay? I asked, suddenly worried. The pack? They won't be hunted or relocated because of what happened, will they? Dr. Reeves smiled reassuringly. Quite the opposite. The pack's territory has already been declared a special protection zone. No hunting, no development, no human interference. After what they did for you, the governor himself signed the order. Those wolves are now among the most protected in Alaska. I felt relief wash over me. Ghost would be safe. His pack would be safe. There's something else, Dr. Reeves continued, pulling out her tablet. We've been monitoring wolf populations in that region for years. Your Ghost, we've actually had him on our radar. She showed me photos, trail camera captures of a distinctive white wolf, sometimes alone, sometimes with a pack. He's been with that pack for about 2 years. The grey alpha, we call him Kodiak, actually accepted Ghost despite the size and strength difference. It's rare for a lone wolf to be integrated into an established pack, especially one of a different subspecies. I stared at the photos, my chest tight with emotion. There was Ghost, healthy and strong, living the life he was meant to live. But there was something in those trail camera images, something in his posture when he was looking toward the camera, that made me wonder, had he been waiting? Had some part of him known that someday, somewhere, our paths would cross? Again? Can I started, then stopped, not sure if I should even ask. Can I see him? When I'm recovered? Dr. Reeves' expression became sympathetic but firm. Officer Jenkins, I understand the bond you feel, but Ghost is wild now. He has a pack, a territory, a life in the wilderness. The healthiest thing for both of you is to let him remain wild. No contact, no attempts to interact. Logically, I knew she was right. Emotionally, the thought of never seeing Ghost again felt like losing a part of myself. 2 weeks passed. My physical recovery progressed, slowly, painfully, but steadily. The poachers were formally charged with attempted murder, assault on a federal officer,
illegal poaching operations, and a dozen other crimes. Their illegal trap lines had been discovered and destroyed, freeing several animals that had been caught but not yet killed. The media coverage was intense. "Miracle rescue by white wolf," declared one headline. "Pack saves ranger from certain death," read another. News crews from around the world wanted interviews. I declined most of them, only agreeing to one carefully controlled press conference, where I stressed that wolves were not pets, that what happened was extraordinary and should not encourage people to approach wild animals. But at night, alone in my hospital room, I would look out at the stars and wonder where Ghost was, whether he thought about me as much as I thought about him. On my 16th day in the hospital, something happened that changed everything. It was around 2 in the morning. I was awake. Sleep had been difficult since the incident. Nightmares of cold and wolverines and being helpless plaguing me whenever I closed my eyes. I was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot below, when I heard it. A howl. Distant but unmistakable, carrying across the city from the wilderness beyond. My heart nearly stopped. I knew that voice. I'd heard it in the forest, had felt it vibrate through me when Ghost had called his pack. He was out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond Fairbanks, calling. And then, impossibly, I saw him. At the very edge of the parking lot, where the lights gave way to darkness, a white shape emerged from the shadows. Ghost stood there, clearly visible despite the distance, looking up at the hospital building. At my window. How had he found me? How had he tracked me across miles of wilderness and into a human city? The logical part of my brain said it was impossible, but the part of me that had experienced the last 3 weeks knew better. Some bonds transcend logic. I pressed my hand against the window, knowing he couldn't see the gesture, but needing to make it anyway. Ghost sat down, his white coat gleaming in the parking lot lights, and simply watched. He stayed there for perhaps 5 minutes, then stood, gave one final look toward my window, and melted back into the darkness. He'd come to check on me, to make sure I was okay. And now that he knew I was safe, he could return to his life in the wild. I stood at that window for a long time after he left, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and love for a creature that had given me so much more than I'd ever given him. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. The doctors weren't entirely happy about it, but I'd healed enough to continue recovery at home. My ranger station colleagues threw a subdued welcome back gathering, subdued because they knew I'd be facing months of physical therapy and might never regain full use of my damaged fingers and toes. But I was alive. Against all odds, I was alive. My first morning back in my cabin, I found something that made me stop in my tracks. On my porch, placed carefully near the door, was a freshly killed rabbit. It hadn't been there when I'd arrived the night before. The tracks around it were unmistakable, wolf tracks, and large ones. Ghost had left me an offering. In wolf culture, providing food for pack members was a sign of care, of belonging. He was telling me, in the only way he could, that I was still part of his world. I buried the rabbit respectfully, thanking the animal for its sacrifice and Ghost for his gift. Then I went inside and cried, great heaving sobs of relief and joy and grief for everything I'd lost and found in those frozen woods. That spring, as the snow melted and the wilderness came back to life, I returned to work. Light duty at first, paperwork, training new rangers, consultation on wolf protection policies. My story had sparked a renewed interest in wildlife conservation, particularly for wolf populations. Donations poured into protection programs. Laws were strengthened against poaching. Something good was coming from the trauma. Dr. Reeves contacted me in late April with news. The pack, Ghost's pack, had been spotted with 4 new pups. All healthy, all thriving. Ghost had become a father figure to them. The images showed him playing with the pups, teaching them, protecting them alongside Kodiak and the pack. He's found his purpose, Dr. Reeves said, showing me the trail camera footage. This is what he was always meant to do. I watched the videos over and over. Ghost looked happy, truly happy, romping through the snow with 4 tiny bundles of fur tumbling around his feet. One of the pups was white, like him, the others various shades of grey. They climbed on him, chewed on his ears, and he tolerated it all with infinite patience. "Thank you," I whispered to the screen. "Thank you for choosing life, for choosing the wild, for choosing your pack." But the story wasn't quite over. 6 months after the incident, in late August, I was back on patrol, full duty now, my frostbite scars healed as much as they ever would. I was checking on a section of forest about 8 miles from where Ghost had found me tied to that tree. The area had been reported to have possible illegal activity, though nothing had been confirmed. Was examining some suspicious tracks when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The chattering call of wolverines. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. Following the sound, I came to a small clearing and witnessed something that made my heart stop. Ghost was there, along with 2 members of his pack, including one of the females I recognized from the rescue. And they were defending something. The 4 pups. 3 adult wolverines had somehow separated the pups from the main pack and were trying to make a kill. The adult wolves were outnumbered and outflanked, fighting desperately to protect the young ones who huddled together, terrified. I didn't hesitate. I raised my service pistol and fired 3 shots into the air. Not at the wolverines, but close enough to startle them. The sound echoed like thunder through the forest, and the wolverines scattered, disappearing into the underbrush with angry chatters. Ghost spun toward me, his body tense, ready to defend the pups even
Against a human with a gun.
Then recognition hit. His entire posture changed, from aggressive to... Was that relief? "It's okay," I called softly. "I've got you, you're safe." The pups, larger now than when I'd seen them in the spring footage, peered at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The white one, bolder than its siblings, actually took a step toward me, before Ghost gently blocked it with his body. The female wolf I recognized gave me a long look, then howled, calling the rest of the pack. Within minutes, Kodiak and the other pack members arrived, responding to the summons. They took in the scene, the scattered evidence of the wolverine attack, me with my gun, Ghost standing between his pack and the human. Kodiak approached slowly, cautiously. When he was about 15 feet away, he sat down and regarded me with those intelligent eyes. Then he did something that brought tears to my eyes for the second time since knowing these wolves. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. I bowed mine in return. "We're even now," I said to Ghost, though I spoke to the whole pack. "You saved me. I saved your pups. The debt is paid." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't about debts anymore. It never really had been. This was about something deeper, something more primal. The recognition that despite our different species, despite the vast gulf between wild and civilized, there could be connection, there could be understanding, there could be, in its own way, love. Ghost moved forward, leaving the safety of his pack, and approached me. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could see every detail of his face, see the scars from our shared battles, close enough that when he huffed, I could feel his breath. Slowly, carefully, I extended my hand, not to touch but to offer, an acknowledgement of what we'd been to each other, what we still were. Ghost leaned forward and touched his nose to my outstretched fingers just for a moment. A connection, a recognition, a goodbye and a hello all at once. Then he stepped back, turned, and led his pack deeper into the forest. The pups followed, the white one looking back at me once before vanishing into the green. Within moments they were gone, as if they'd never been there at all. But I knew they had been, and I knew that somewhere in that vast wilderness, Ghost would continue to live, to hunt, to protect his pack. And if our paths crossed again, when our paths crossed again, we would recognize each other. We would remember, because some bonds, forged in ice and blood and desperate survival, never truly break. They only transform into something stronger, something that transcends species and circumstance. I stood in that clearing for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest, feeling the weight of the gun in my hand and the warmth of the sun on my face. I was alive, Ghost was alive, his pack was safe, and in this vast, brutal,
Beautiful wilderness. That was enough. That was everything.
As I turned to head back to my vehicle, I heard it one last time, a howl from deep in the forest. Not a call of distress or warning, but something else, a statement, a promise. I remember. I'll always remember. I smiled through my tears and continued walking, knowing that whatever else happened in my life, I had been part of something extraordinary. I had witnessed the impossible. I had been saved by a ghost. And in saving me, that ghost had taught me the most important lesson of all, that kindness is never wasted, that compassion has power beyond measure, and that the bonds we forge in moments of crisis can last a lifetime and beyond. The wilderness held many secrets, many stories untold. This was ours, mine and Ghost's, and it would live forever in the frozen mountains of Alaska, in the tracks through snow, in the howl of a white wolf calling to his pack. Some debts can never be repaid. Some friendships transcend the
Possible. Some stories are so powerful that they become legend. This was one of them.